Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line, I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
And we are back. It is Pollock and Thurston here on Wednesday, July the 30th. I am John Pollock, reporting live from Toronto. Brandon Thurston from an undisclosed location. How are you, Brandon?
I'm fine. I'm in an undisclosed sector of an undisclosed facility and in an undisclosed location.
Yes. It is. You can confirm you are not in the WWE host hotel in East Rutherford, New Jersey.
I'm not going to confirm or deny any of those aspects of this case. I'm like a records request to the FTC. Saying one thing or the other would confirm or disconfirm, but I'm not releasing any records or saying whether they exist.
All right. Has Vince McMahon ever personally told you to use steroids?
I'm not going to get into discussions I've had with people off the record.
Okay. Any more than 3 times for rehabilitation purposes. On that note, everybody, special edition of the show today, we're going to be doing a large focus on Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, which has obviously been the biggest story in and around professional wrestling over the past week. We will be getting to several other stories a little later on. There's a notable update in the Ring Boy lawsuit. Vince McMahon in a car wreck. A big congratulations to yourself and Chris Zellner marking 10 years, which I was listening to your show last week after the news of Hogan's passing, not knowing what the subject matter was going to be. And before Hogan's passing, you had planned to cover the week of his firing from WWE in 2015. And I cannot believe that the planets aligned for that on your behalf, where you were already digging pretty heavy into this whole story before the news of Hogan's passing.
Yeah, I mean, so what happened was about a couple weeks out, I messaged, Chris Zellner, who I do the podcast with, and I'm like, okay, what should we do for the anniversary? So I check which years we've done as far as what week to cover on Between the Sheets. And then I'm like, wait a second, let's see what 2015 had, because that's the year we started. So, let's see what the top stories were. Let's see if that's something to do. And then I was like, oh, that's the week of the Inquirer story about Hogan. So then we were both in agreement, oh, we have to do this. There is no way we can't do this. So last week we recorded the Hogan segment on Monday night, recorded the rest of the show on Monday and Tuesday night, and our halftime segment we recorded Thursday night. So that was after Hogan passed. But yeah, we were planning on covering it anyway. And then because of that, it was at the front of my mind a few minutes after after I found out that Hogan died, I realized, oh my God, he died 10 years to the day from when the Inquirer story came out.
It's going through the history. Like, it's remarkable how many of the events that are relevant to Hogan, and particularly the racist scandal, that how much of that it happened just in the month of July over various years.
I mean, the 2018 thing, of course, happened in July because WWE was like, oh, he was suspended from the Hall of Fame for 3 years. So that makes sense. But yeah, so wait.
Arsenio Hall is July. The steroid distribution trial is July.
Bash at the Beach 2000 is July.
Even Bash at the Beach 96. I mean, yeah, like when you think about it, there were quite a lot of July events that do keep popping up in the Hogan chronology.
I just thought of another one. His worst drawing MSG title defense of his first year as champion is July, because that's the Wendy Richter Moolah show where Hogan Valentine is also on the card. Yeah, so a lot of July things.
So he lived a lot of life in July.
Yeah, I mean those were those 400-day years for Hogan back when with the international dateline and such.
Of course.
So I'm kind of curious, David, how you were monitoring the Hogan story. Like, obviously, all of us were aware of pretty much from the one source of Bubba the Love Sponge that was painting a pretty dire picture of Hogan's health. We know he had the neck operation in May. Clearly, it was worse than was being led on. But it was like this very difficult story to tackle, in that here is somebody that clearly is not wanting to publicize their private health situation, but it was also impossible to ignore that. Say whatever you want about Bubba the Love Sponge, and I would not place a ton of credibility on him. This is someone that was extremely tapped into the Hogan orbit, even after the entire fallout over the Gawker tape. So, I mean, how much of that was sort of just kind of informing your thinking as the lead up to Thursday? Like, we can't say we were completely caught off guard by this, but I think still it was still like almost this Hogan like work right until the end of like what was real, what was fiction.
Yeah, like certainly we didn't record the Between the Sheets episode expecting him to die. But I mean, if I'm being entirely honest, early last week was when I kind of started, like I wasn't thinking about it that much, but it was when I kind of started to go from, okay, he's clearly worse off than they're saying, but I don't know if I buy what Bubba's saying about him being on his deathbed. To then last week, there were a couple things that really started to make it seem a little more dire.
This was something that the three of us were talking about in the last couple of weeks, is that you could point to his social media posts and see that, these aren't new photos that they're uploading here to social media, even though they're dated in the present. These are from a couple months ago or something like that.
Yeah, on his Instagram, which I didn't notice this until I had it pointed out to me after he died, but I guess his Twitter was managed by him and his Instagram was managed by his representation. So the Twitter just went dark when he got the neck surgery. And the Instagram kept going. And yeah, if you looked at the photos, you could tell, oh, wait a second. They may not have posted these before, but you scroll down a little and this is from this appearance. This is not a new photo. I would say, honestly, the thing I found to be the biggest red flag before, the week of his death was he had a Hulk Hogan's, wrestling, whatever he calls it, Hulk Hogan's Wrestling Shop, I guess, store open in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, which sounds like an odd location, but the exit into Pigeon Forge is like, it's an exit that people have to take going to all sorts of other like tourist locations. So it makes sense to put something that's intended to kind of be a tourist trap type store there. He wasn't there for the opening, and you would think he would be. And there were no plans for him to, there were no announced appearances or anything. He hadn't been doing the karaoke night and stuff like that. So, but the fact that the Pigeon Forge store was opening and he wasn't there, was definitely something that stuck in my mind more. And then last week, you had the announcement of Real American Freestyle on Fox Nation. He's nowhere to be found in the promotion. It's just Eric Bischoff. And no one's even really asking about him.
No.
And
that stood out to me like whether that was something intentional or just not brought up. Like, to me, it was one thing, like his absence was really notable. Like to me, it's like, it's obviously very serious if he's not, he is the face of this thing. And obviously for Fox, I'm sure they would want him plastered on their network. But there was also, like, Eric could have several times says, hey, Hulk's on the mend. He recently had a serious surgery. Like there was nothing even in reference to, what his status was or an update. And it just kept like, they were keeping that information very buttoned down.
Well, his wife had made a statement saying that that basically alluding to the rumors that Bubba Love Sponge had put out, basically saying that he's fine and he's talking, he's not in a coma, all that.
Yeah. And the fact that he couldn't even do a remote interview, I think, was the part that stuck out. Like, okay, he's on the mend. Maybe it's a little worse than they're saying, but couldn't they at least have him zoom in? I mean, the news networks, they all do that now. Like, what, so there was that. The thing that really made me think, oh no, this is bad, was the Jimmy Hart tweet last week. I think it was Tuesday, where he said that he had been at karaoke with Hulk and Nick the night before, and it was great. Hulkster sounded amazing, whatever it said, but that was basically what it said, not verbatim.
Yeah, well, I'll just point in, like, that's exactly how I read it too, David. And then it was not until like Way and I were discussing it, and it's like, if you look at like the way the tweet is actually structured, like it is, Hulk is doing phenomenal. Karaoke was great last night with Nick, and it's like you're left with the impression, like, was Hogan there? And it just screams like, how's there no photo of this guy? And then it's like, Way was parsing it as he's not actually saying Hulk was there, but it's certainly alluding to, like, it is leading you in that direction as well. Like, it was a very bizarre tweet, and one that, there just felt to be, and I'm sure there were people even close to him that were getting misinformation. Like Kevin Nash stated as much this week that,
Looks like he took the tweet down. I'm trying to find it, and I can find where it appears to have been deleted. Yeah.
Kevin Nash stated he had talked to Paul Levesque this week, and he was of the impression that, he was doing much better. Like, it seems like they were keeping this exceptionally quiet for various reasons that can be debated about, whether it was just, maintaining that image, or just wanting to downplay it, or just strictly his own wishes for privacy at that time. But that was a whole part of this, is kind of like marred in mystery, and like the Hogan whisperer in all of this was Bubba the Love Sponge. Like, this just reads like some true crime novel.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I can't say who, but I know of one person that I wouldn't say was Hogan's inner circle, but had enough of a long-standing relationship to Hogan that you would expect this person to be kept in the loop, and they weren't. So they were keeping it very close to the vest, to, I would think the people you would assume to be his inner circle. Yeah, and then, when I saw that Jimmy Hart tweet, like, I actually didn't read it the way that Way did. I was reading it.
I didn't either. I read it like you, that he was alluding to the fact, like, Hogan was there. And to me, if you're, like, this is his first appearance in 2 months, and there's no photos of this guy, and it to me would only create more of an error. But I read it the same way as you, David.
The text is, this is 2 days before he dies. This is on July 22nd. Hulk is doing great. I won't do the Jimmy Hart voice. Hulk is doing great, doing phenomenal. Last night at karaoke with Nick was absolutely fantastic, baby.
Yeah. So Way has a good point. Like, technically true.
Yes.
Because they did do the karaoke event just without Hogan there.
It was this really did call for two separate tweets of like, Hulk's doing great, he's phenomenal. Next tweet, karaoke with Nick last night was great, but that was not the case, and I don't think that was just a 81-year-old Jimmy Hart. I don't know. To get into the whole, I think you're going too far to call this a cover-up of such. Like, I think the man is still owed privacy in all of this. Like, he has no reason or obligation to have to disclose all of this. But it was one that, I mean, there was also a level of like, that people are looking back that were some, like, for a Kevin Nash, for instance, like, he stated, like, listen, I was flat out told misinformation, and had I known, like, I'm 2 hours away from this guy, I wish I could have had the opportunity to at least see this guy one more time. So, I mean, that was kind of even people around him that were, obviously there was a certain message they were sticking to. And
Is it plausible that, like, what motivate other than privacy? Is there any plausible motivation that he would have had to protect business interests that would have been at risk if he was known to be in poor health?
I mean, that's what it comes down to me, as far as if before his death, at least, it was actually a story. If someone had proof or something that he was lying, or he and his people were lying to business partners, like the beer company or the company licensing his name for the New York sports bar and all that. Like, if something like that was going on and someone had proof, yeah, that would be a story. But it's something we can talk about now after the fact. But like, short of something like that, and we have no proof that anything like that happened. Like, it's a celebrity who decided to keep things private. Like, I don't think it's that big a deal in and of itself, but it's just that it got very over the top, I think, with the Jimmy Hart tweet.
So since Thursday, I think if we were to look at like what level of coverage is a Hulk Hogan passing going to generate, I think we all knew it was going to be significant and go way beyond just pro wrestling. Was this above the level you saw, Bix? And as well, I found it to be very interesting of what was focused on maybe more heavily than I thought. For instance, like the whole union busting story ended up to me like coming up in a lot of places that I didn't necessarily think that would be as top of mind of an issue. And I think part of it is the fact that was a portion of the Netflix documentary where he, admits right there on camera, I was the guy to go to Vince McMahon. It's just interesting to see like what aspects of Hulk Hogan were focused on. Of course, I think right at the top of it is the entire Gawker story and the sex tape. But what have you kind of viewed and made of some of the coverage over the last week when it comes to Hogan and this volume of it?
I'm trying to think if anything really surprised me, because I think the benchmark we all had was Randy Savage in 2011, where, I think the three of us have had this discussion privately, I think off the air in the past. It may have even come up on a past podcast. The explosion of coverage of that was so big that I've always felt like that kind of dovetailing with the CM Punk pipe bomb stuff happening at the same time. I think there was another story or two I'm forgetting as well. Like, I've always felt like that really caused like a leap in the willingness that certain outlets had to cover wrestling, at least on a more surface level. So I was expecting something very big, and I was expecting more than Savage. And, I think the way that the TV news networks have shifted over the years, I think, plays into this, where I think if Randy Savage died now, he would have gotten like the kind of volume he did on cable news this past week that Hogan did. But because there's that awareness that wrestling fans are going to seek that out now, and also Hogan's just a bigger star, I can't say it surprised me really. Just because like you had to know it was going to be, a few levels bigger than Savage, which was the last really big one. So no, I don't think I was surprised or anything. But it was interesting to see some of the reactions as far as who brought up the Gawker stuff maybe more than others. It seems like it's mainly been kind of, at least as far as like written articles, it seems like it's mainly been more like inside baseball type places, so to speak. But it's come up some elsewhere too. Like, it's definitely considered part of the public story of his life for sure.
Yeah, I'll just say I did a fair amount of media on the Thursday, and I would say just about every outlet I spoke to, they all brought up like the sex tape, the racist rant. I mean, that I knew that was going to be a big portion of people's coverage, like just because it's recent and it's really stuck with him. And I mean, if there was any, like, I think the Intuit Dome reaction in January. That's still fresh in a lot of people's minds as well. That it's a major portion, and it's like Hulk Hogan is he's attached into all these other kind of sub areas. Like if you're like in terms of like the legacy of that, of like Gawker going under, like Hogan is like, that's going to inform a lot of like journalists of like what a landmark case this ended up being, that we're seeing, just exemplified today with a lot of outlets that are now under fire for their coverage. And then you have Hogan, who was embedded in like this tabloid culture for most of the 2000s up until the present, and all of the coverage that Fox News has provided for Hogan because of the, his attachment to the Republican Party. Like he was in all these different areas, and it just resulted in this last week where it's been varied as well. It almost feels as though there's like this, you almost have to like pick a side of how you're going to remember Hulk Hogan in a lot of these different places, and you're seeing all of that.
And I would suggest, like, beyond being maybe the biggest wrestling star ever, I think there's an argument there, at least in the United States, right? And is the way that he has changed culture besides wrestling is that Gawker case, right? And just going through the details of writing the article that I wrote, there's so many twists and turns in this. I've been telling Bix, you need to write a book about this. But like, Bix, you're probably the best one of anybody to explain to people who don't know, or even me. I haven't got the details all sorted out. Like, because there's this sex tape, but then there's also the racist rants that become a part of it. So Hogan sues Gawker in Florida court. This guy named Peter Thiel gets involved. They win. And like, what impact do people believe that has on freedom of the press today?
Okay, I mean, where do I start with that? So I guess if I start with the actual, question at the end there.
Yeah.
So the backstory on that is, Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley investor, already had been kind of pissed off at Gawker, and
because they outed him as being gay years prior without his permission.
Yeah. So there are some wrinkles to that, though. So they had a blog that was defunct by the end of Gawker, a sub-blog called Valleywag, which was specifically about, Silicon Valley, just business stuff and all that, separate from the tech coverage they had at Gizmodo. And one day, Owen Thomas does this article. What is it? Peter Thiel is totally gay, people? Something like that.
A very Gawker headline of the time.
Yes. And here's the thing, though. Owen Thomas has been very clear about this. He reached out to Peter Thiel's representatives. They told him there was nothing wrong with the article. They did not have an issue with it. The article itself is, headline aside, a very thoughtful rumination on the role of Peter Thiel's sexuality in Silicon Valley and dealing with investors and stuff like that. And also, Owen Thomas is gay, and Nick Denton, the Gawker founder, then whatever his title was running the company, also an openly gay man. So the article itself, and because he was not, how do we put this? He publicly had never talked about being gay, but it was one of those things where he was kind of otherwise considered out. I guess call it a Jodie Foster type situation.
It's kind of like Barry Diller up until, he put this book out recently, but I mean, that was like a very open secret.
Yes. I use Jodie Foster as the example, though, because Jodie Foster had the whole thing of like, didn't she say at one point, like, I didn't know I needed to come out, or something like that? So it was made clear to Owen Thomas, though, we do not have a problem with the article. What later comes out, I believe, in Ryan Holiday's book about the case, which, by the way, for the most part, I do not recommend. It's not a very good book, but he does have direct access to Thiel, and that's the most important part of it.
And Thiel's position as a power player today is he's a billionaire. He's a major donor to Republican causes, including Donald Trump. He's a board member on Meta, I believe.
Yeah, Palantir is one of his companies. So there's a lot going on. He's very powerful. Yes. So what actually, according to, I believe it was directly according to Teal in the Ryan Holiday book, it wasn't the article that pissed him off. It was the top comment in the article, which was from Nick Denton, went into how Teal had threatened him previously if they published this, which does kind of conflict some of the other stuff, but it wasn't even that bothered him. It was Denton kind of trying to imply that there was some deeper secret reason that Teal was not publicly out. That was the actual reason that he decided to wage war on Gawker. It was not the article itself. It was not the idea that he was outed. So that's where all that starts. So now I'm going to breeze through this part. If you want to know more about it, read the articles that Ryan Mack wrote, I believe at the time for Forbes, about this, that he just meets up with like this grad student guy, Aaron D'Souza. I forget how. And he hatches this plan. And this is also while Teal had been like holding meetings with like disgruntled former Gawker employees to find a way to get at them and stuff. But this guy is like just fund the lawsuits against them until it, whether it's death by 1,000 cuts or you find the right suit that kills the company, whatever. It just wage lawfare against them. Find the right lawyers and you pay for it all and let's see what happens. Hogan case is one of those. And realistically, the Hogan case is really the only one that actually had any merit whatsoever. I mean, we're talking about some really nonsense lawsuits that Charles Harder and others brought against Gawker Media. The most infamous one, because the guy ended up redoing it too, is the guy who claimed to have invented email when he hadn't.
So what exactly was Hogan's claim of defamation? Was he even?
It wasn't defamation. That's the thing. Everyone So this is a great example. The podcast that I was on last week that asked me to come on about Hogan, Second Captains. The host started to say something like you just said, and then caught himself and was like, wait a second, it wasn't a defamation lawsuit at all in the first place. It was invasion of privacy, right?
Yeah.
Invasion of privacy, infringement of personality rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Right. So, but it's like, because Harder ended up becoming like this kind of vexatious libel attorney, a lot of people kind of remember the Hogan Gawker case as being defamation, but it's not.
And was he claiming that the racist words that he used were part of that defamation, or was he just saying you published this sex tape?
No, there was no defamation. There was no defamation claim. Yeah.
But he wasn't complaining about the racist quotes coming out. He was complaining about the sex tape because Gawker didn't publish the racist quotes, correct?
Gawker did not even have the racist quotes. So this is one of the things that always gets confused. Bubba shot 3 sex tapes. There was the one that got sent to Gawker. There was the one that had the racist comments towards the end. And there was one that was basically just sex without any real conversation or any other controversy in it. I sort of think people who are aware of that is part of why for a long time there was definitely a belief that Hogan was in on it. Like maybe he was in on the one video, but not the others. I mean, these days it's pretty clear he didn't know. But I think it added to that at the time when people found out, oh, there's this one video that is kind of comes off the way if they had been planning on releasing it. But that was not what happened. So yeah, there's 3 videos. Gawker is sent the one that we all know about and includes the comments about eating too much sushi, and there's something that was more controversial in there. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it didn't get the attention that no, that was a different one. But regardless,
imagine a different world where the worst thing to come out of this is Hogan admits excessive sushi eating in sex tape.
Yes. So I guess now we're circling just to the general Hogan Gawker thing. So, yeah. So what happened was Bubba had shot these surreptitiously. His wife knew. Hogan did not. His wife did at one point give conflicting testimony under oath, but somehow didn't get in trouble for that. So they shoot these without Hogan's knowledge. During the divorce, Bubba elects to move the DVDs into his office. Why he thought this was a good idea, especially
office outside of the home.
Yes, into his office at the radio station.
What could go wrong?
Especially there have always been rumors that the existence of videos like these were a known thing around Bubba. So someone stole them, believed to be one of his employees. He then worked with a rival radio personality, it's believed, to then get these out there, with the idea being the one that was sent to Gawker was kind of, I think the words they used were shot across the bow. Because then, days later, they reach out to him through a sex tape broker, Keith Davidson, to basically blackmail him about releasing the other videos, including the N-word video.
And this is how it gets to Gawker.
Yes. And look, I want to make it clear from where we go forward. I would never defend posting the sex tape, especially the edited version of the sex tape. I would certainly never defend posting it without any kind of blurring or anything, as they did it. It's more what happens next that is the problem.
That's it. I was just writing about this today, and I think obviously people can draw a lot of parallels to this with the Donald Sterling case, in that you can absolutely condemn, you can't just unhear what is on these tapes, while you can still acknowledge their privacy was invaded, and yes, this was somebody that was being filmed having sex without consent to being filmed. There is victim is a strong word to use for a Hulk Hogan, given what is on this tape. But at its core, this is a guy that his privacy was absolutely invaded in all of this. But it's one where that cannot dismiss what is on this tape that you hear as well. And that's why I make it the comparison to Donald Sterling, who too did not know he was being recorded. But once you hear what he's saying, you can't just sweep that under the rug either. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, it takes a lot of time for all this to come out. Now, in 2012, there had been whispers online about the existence of the N-word video. I think because no one really considered that there were multiple videos, I think a lot of that just kind of died down, because everyone's like, well, if Gawker had that, they would have used it. They had Nick Ritchie at The Dirty, who published screenshots, alluded to there being N-word comments, and who was the newspaper reporter who had all sourcing about that? It was after the Gawker article came out, but I think it was someone in Philly, maybe Philly Inquirer, and I think in their gossip column. And so it was known that it might exist, but there was no proof, there were no quotes, etc. One aspect that ends up kind of becoming a big part of Gawker's defense is that, how do I put this in a way where it doesn't necessarily sound like I'm agreeing with them and I'm just explaining what they said? Hogan does not seem as bothered by the sex tape part in his initial media interviews, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's worth noting when when the clip first surfaces, it's right as Hogan has booked all this media around Bound for Glory in 2012. So he's the only person in TNA that's going to get on a Howard Stern, that's going to get onto some of these other outlets. And it just happens that he was on this media tour. And of course, this is going to be brought up. And Hogan is, he's playing it off. And it's I don't know what Hogan necessarily does in that position. Right. But if you do listen to some of the comments, it's this is embarrassing. This is hardly a scandal that's going to sink the Hulk Hogan brand when it's just this limited to a clip of him having sex, as opposed to the audio that would later surface.
Right, and from a legal perspective, like, they screwed up, but the Gawker lawyers did approve publishing it in the edit that they published it. I've always felt like the lawyer who approved that should probably get a lot more blame than she does. But that's a whole other thing. So, yeah, Hogan... So, yeah, as Gawker's lawyers eventually point out, Hogan is very jokey. He's even saying stuff like, oh, God, thank God it wasn't me and a guy. It's stuff like that. His tune changes after he gets the blackmail letter talking about the racist comments. So that was why Gawker wanted their defense to be, and it ends up getting all sealed and excluded. They wanted a big part of their defense to be, look, no, he was not actually impacted emotionally or anything or by the sex tape part. It was his fear that this would lead to the N-word comments being exposed. And I mean, he was kind of right. It took a few years, but I don't know if those comments ever come out in the form they do without the lawsuit. I mean, certainly I can tell you because I'm the one who posted the audio originally and broke the story about the audio actually being available. The audio certainly never comes out without the lawsuit. Because the audio came out because the FBI sting operation on the blackmailers was filed as an exhibit that was sealed, and then the local appellate court then unsealed. And
that's something else I realize is that you don't have the idea, you have the audio, but not from the tape itself directly, but you have the tape being played in a hotel room that's picked up by somebody's microphone, and the FBI is involved.
Yes, it's picked up on the FBI, microphones that they're wearing and all that.
And David and Chris Zellner actually just played this clip on their show this past week. If you want to hear it, like, it's very grainy audio. Like, you can it's like this like second generation version that you're basically listening to in this hotel room.
It's the echo of the hotel room
that we did too. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, it's the echo of being played on the TV and all that kind of makes it harder to hear. But
which, if you know Bixenspan, had to have been the most frustrating thing in the world. The poor audio quality when you first heard this thing.
Oh, will you stop? I did actually think about taking another stab 9 years later to see if I could clean it up better than I did 9 years ago, but I didn't.
It's an amazing what if, though, when you talk about the fact of, like, Hogan in 2012, like, he's in TNA, he's got several of, like, these side projects going, but he's still reeling from the divorce with Linda. You had the
John Graziano settlement, yeah.
The John Graziano settlement as well. Like, he's not taking on this case without somebody to finance him. So, like, you take Peter Thiel out of this, maybe eventually the racist rant still comes out, but I think it's a much lesser percentage chance of it happening, and it really does change Hulk Hogan's, like, final 10 years in terms of his public image. But, like, he's not engaging in this years long legal battle without a Peter Thiel as the Wizard of Oz in this whole scenario.
No, I think he files the lawsuit regardless. I think if I remember right, I don't think he's in touch with Thiel or representative for Thiel or anything like that yet when he first files. But right, it's the long-term, drawn-out nature. Probably does not happen without Peter Thiel's backing. As Peter Thiel put it, he literally used the term single-digit millionaires to describe Hogan and how they're disadvantaged against media companies.
Those poor single-digit millionaires.
Yes.
Thiel's involvement here wasn't known until late in the trial, or maybe just after the trial.
I think it was right.
Or was it after? It
was right after Law and Crime, where I would start working a few months later, but I would not yet at the time. Dan Abrams, the founder, TV lawyer,
the
son of
report.
Landmark, First Amendment lawyer, Floyd Abrams, etc. Like, he wrote about how there had been rumors that some, like, rich Gawker hater had been funding the plaintiff side of the lawsuit. And And there were a few different reasons why this was even a rumor in the first place. So like there had been speculation of like, oh well, they're staying in oddly expensive hotel rooms. The out of town lawyers. There was that. The big one though was that the emotional distress claim was dropped from the lawsuit. I forget exactly when. This is important because of all the counts they put in the lawsuit. Emotional stress was the only one that would have triggered Gawker's publisher's insurance. Here's why that's a red flag. Normally, you're a plaintiff's lawyer. What you're trying to do is win the most money for your client. An insurance policy that would probably want to settle and would cover at least a big part of a judgment and all that, that's like Christmas. That's not something you deliberately try to remove. So removing that made it fairly clear.
They were going for the jugular.
Yes, exactly. They are not doing this necessarily to make Hulk Hogan whole, even if that's why Hogan is in it. One thing I picked up on when it was settled with the bankruptcy court after Gawker had to file bankruptcy, they end up settling for $31 million after the judgment was around $140. $31 million was basically what Hogan's net worth was before the divorce and the Graziano lawsuit. And I always found it so interesting that was what he settled for. Like, was that the number he had in his head the whole time? Whatever.
And so, like, what, to go back to what I was asking about earlier, like, what impact does this have for, suing press organizations in the future?
So the big one is that it not that this never happened before. Sometimes you'll see people on the Hogan side or defenders of that side be like, oh, this doesn't cause a legally binding precedent. How can you say it sets precedent?
This was state court. It's not like this was in federal court.
But also it was a jury verdict. Like, it's not anything that would be a legal precedent, but that's not what anyone means when they say that. It was that it made it very clear how easy it was for someone with a lot of money to try to crush a smaller media company and certainly individual journalists if they're not tied in with a bigger company. Last year you guys did that article for Front Office Sports with Tim Marchman unmasking the at the time unnamed WWE executives in the Janelle Grant lawsuit. The reason you did it there was they were able to give you guys a freelancer contract with the indemnification rights in the event that you were sued. So, you've talked about this on the air. I'm not breaking any news here. So it's a real concern. For some examples, the guy who claimed to be the inventor of email, as a consequence of the bankruptcy, and we should explain in a minute why Gawker had to file bankruptcy. I had never known this was a thing before, and it still kind of amazes me now. If you're an entity that files bankruptcy and you have lawsuits pending against you, the requested damages amount becomes a debt in the bankruptcy. Even though this has not been adjudicated at all, even though it's just a number someone put down on a piece of paper. This meant that basically everyone with a pending lawsuit got a settlement from the bankruptcy, pretty sizable. I don't think there was any that was less than like $100,000, maybe 75,000 was the lowest. Yeah, and like I said,
was put out of business by this.
Yes, other than Hogan, these lawsuits really didn't have any merit, and it emboldened some of them. The inventor of email guy then sued TechDirt for basically their coverage of all this. And TechDirt is a successful website, but it's Mike Masnick and a very small staff. It is not a big company. They did not have the resources to fight this, to the point they had to kind of do a middle ground settlement just to end the lawsuit. The articles are still up, but they have certain a certain statement from the inventor of email guy at the end now and stuff like that. But it emboldened him that he could try to bully anyone in court that said something he didn't like, no matter how true it was. Right now.
But yeah, is the argument of people who say the Hogan Gawker case, with that resulting in Hogan's favor, like that chills freedom of the press. This shows that it can work to put a media outlet out of business because they published something that you don't like, even though they were publishing a sex tape, which you can, if you forget everything else about the story, you can sympathize with Hogan about.
Right. And I mean, the thing is, though, like I said, I never would have done it, but like legally, Gawker was widely expected to win on appeal. The trial was considered a formality. Trials aren't where you decide First Amendment issues in front of not in front of a jury, blah blah blah. Everyone figured, the Gawker lawyers, legal experts, etc., this is going to go to appeal. Gawker wins on appeal. The problem with that became clear in the months before the trial, maybe a little earlier, but it became public in the months before the trial. The Teal side claims they were not aware of this at the beginning and when they moved it to local court, but that it was something they found out later. I am not sure if I buy that necessarily, but in Florida, there's a rule that if you lose a judgment and you want to appeal, you have to put down a bond in the amount of the appeal capped at $50 million. Because it was a judgment in excess of $50 million, that means they had to put down a $50 million bond. And even if they went to a bondsman, so to speak, and didn't have to pay the full $50 million, it was still cash they didn't have. I want to say it was like in the $10 to $20 million range.
This is what
just to be
Gawker would have had to put up when they're already being driven into bankruptcy.
Well, this is what made them have to file bankruptcy. The company would not have been in danger otherwise.
Because they wouldn't be paying out yet until appeals were exhausted.
No, and the normal thing to do would be for the judge to grant their motion to stay the execution of the judgment pending the appeal, which the judge refused to do. And, we could go on for days talking about how in the bag for Hogan the judge was. I'll just give one example because I think it makes it very clear. In Florida, somehow there is this rule that allows jurors to submit questions to witnesses at the end of their testimony. I think there are maybe a couple other places like that, but it's fairly rare, is my understanding. It sounds ridiculous on paper even before you get into the specifics. At one point during the trial, Emma Carmichael, who had been an editor at Gawker, eventually was the editor-in-chief of Jezebel, their women's issue site, which she was at the time of the trial. She testifies. The juror questions were basically, did you sleep with your bosses? Asking the female editor of a women's issue site, did you get your job by sleeping with your bosses, one of whom is gay? If that doesn't show that this was not a judge acting neutrally, I don't know what does. And it was
Judge Pamela Campbell.
Yes, who previously was best known for being the lawyer for Terry Schiavo's parents. And she put some pretty awful stuff out into the media in that context, too. So she refuses to grant that motion to stay the execution of the judgment. Gawker immediately files the bankruptcy petition that they had ready. And that was what sent the company into bankruptcy. Could Teal have driven them out of business with just a parade of lawsuits? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't have been as easy. It was a perfect storm. That it was the kind of case where a jury would inevitably rule for the plaintiff, that it was in a location, a jurisdiction where any larger judgment would come, could easily bankrupt Gawker, even if, before an appeal. That's actually the reason why Gawker itself is killed. That's why the company files bankruptcy. The non-Gawker.com sites are sold out of bankruptcy to Univision, etc. So, yeah. It's I don't know where to pivot from there, but go ahead.
I mean, of your, like, working with as many like different freelance outlets of yourself, David, like what have you experienced personally when it comes to like the type of stories that you're reporting on, and where the level of protections that, you know, outlets have shown toward you? Like, have you noticed like a discernible difference in this last decade when it comes to, you know, freelancers that are going to have the protections for, you know, cases that could very well result in lawsuits?
So it's weird in the sense that, like, the former Gawker sites, you know, I wrote for Deadspin, you know, as a freelancer for 2.5 years during its ownership under Univision, and then the new owners later. And it was never in the freelancer contract that they indemnified you, but they had been very clear in court in the past. They had represented freelancers under those circumstances and indemnified them. That, like, effective, like, and the lawyer assured me, like, we indemnify you, etc. So, like, that was actually my starting point for that, even though there wasn't actually anything on paper, you know, assuring me of that. I'm trying to think of where it comes, you know, 2020, when I did the Ring Boy story for Business Insider.
That's what I'm thinking of specifically, because there was at least an implied legal threat, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So we sent in the request for comment to WWE. Jared McDevitt replies with this threatening letter that we quote in the article, and honestly, I think it made the article better in various ways. And I think I had asked previously for indemnification, and I forget the reason I didn't get it if I had asked. But once we had the threat, they immediately drafted up a new contract that indemnified me. Which, you know, good on them. So, you know, there was that. Trying to think what else. I mean, okay, here's an example. We were talking about law and crime earlier. One of the pieces of original reporting I did for Law and Crime was about Tommy Morrison's widow's lawsuit against the Nevada State Athletic Commission, among other people. How do I even start with this? Tommy Morrison, the boxer who was basically retired in 96 after he tested positive for HIV on his athletic commission test. So he and his wife, before his death, had definitely kind of moved into the HIV denier conspiracy theorist area. And after his death, his wife files this lawsuit on her own, and she kept it going for so long, and I have no idea how, against the commission doctors at the time, etc. But what comes out over the course of the lawsuit and discovery is that there were multiple instances, multiple people who were like, oh yeah, he told me that he actually tested positive originally in 1989 when he was getting life insurance paperwork and stuff. So it was like, so wait a second, how did the commission miss this, etc. It was an interesting story. I think I did a follow-up too. A couple years ago, I went looking for the stories. They were mysteriously the only stories of mine on Law and Crime that were no longer on the website. I asked. I was told that nothing had happened, but being that the widow had been trying to send me requests on Facebook Messenger and stuff, I've always assumed she reached out to them. I mean, there was also... during the Hogan Gawker fallout, there was an article I wrote for them where I was really not happy with how they edited it after the fact, because it was about one of the people who sued them and whose case was nonsense. And I don't remember what it was that they took issue with, but the person sent them a threat, and they edited the article, you know, kind of in a way to kind of kowtow to him, and it was not something I liked. So that happened, and then other stuff happens too. Like, this didn't go anywhere. I didn't really have any protection though, because it was about stuff I said on Twitter. You know, I can't get into all of the details. I mean, there was no agreement or anything beyond that. Just we agreed that we wouldn't share our discussions about it. But like, David Lagana sent me a legal threat in the months after speaking out. it didn't go anywhere. But like that happened too. I didn't say anything defamatory, and thank God I actually happened to be talking to a very good defamation lawyer who agreed to, just kind of guide me through it for free, unless he sued me, which he didn't. But like that was another thing that came up. So it's like it's definitely
clear how
informed a lot.
indemnification works is that, I mean, for example, just in current news, you have Donald Trump suing Rupert Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal, and the two authors who wrote the article for the Wall Street Journal, Joe Palazzolo and Khadijah Safdar, who happened to also report on Vince McMahon earlier, and they're named defendants. Now, I'm sure that there's an indemnification that they have with the Dow Jones Company or whatever, that
I would hope so.
that the Dow Jones Company is going to defend them, going to provide legal representation for them in this case, in such a case where they would be sued for something like this. But that's for the lawsuit to sort out, right? Like that doesn't prevent you from being named as a defendant.
Right. And there's other complications too. One of the things that ended up happening was that because Gawker had to go bankrupt, that included the indemnification rights as an asset of AJ Delario, and that made that all messy. And the way he put it, I think it was when he was interviewed by Esquire, he said something like, "Everything I was told about this lawsuit not affecting me personally was a lie."
Yeah.
Because if the company was still, not in bankruptcy, it would not have been an issue. They would, but because of the bankruptcy, there was that, and they even had, they ended up kind of throwing him under the bus at the end too. Look, I'm not defending the decision to publish the sex tape, but he was admittedly at the time not in the best way mental health wise, and basically at the bottom of his drug issues and stuff. And he had a lawyer telling him he could publish it. I wouldn't do it, but I can see how someone in that state would end up being like, well, if a lawyer says it's okay. So yeah, it's like, it's not a silver bullet that keeps you out of trouble completely. And, also like the indemnification policies, which we should say always have like a carve out of like, as long as you are acting within your job description and not breaking the law, then you're covered.
Just as far as the go ahead, John.
No, you follow up.
I was going to say, like, as far as the, we were discussing earlier off air, the article that you wrote for the Daily Beast around, I think, 2021, and the article that I wrote trying to put together here's because I think that there's so much discussion happening around Hulk Hogan because he just died, and people talking about whether, to what degree you should really be celebrating this guy, or how people feel about it because of the racist things that he's said. I know there's some things that you want to discuss that, that maybe I didn't cover in there, or differences between the two as far as, because I think the reason why I wrote that is because I think that there's just a lack of, people having a grasp of what the real details are. You take the N-word out of it, like that's still a racist statement that he's making about about who his daughter should be dating.
And homophobic comments and too that are kind of just like in any of these stories, tons are just like this is just like, it's just a headline snapshot reaction to what the story is. And when you dive into it, like, I'm glad both of you have kind of gone into those details, but yeah, go ahead, David.
I mean, even before we get into that for a second, we also need to point out, as I think, John, I think you did on one of the shows with Way this week, like, there was also the Bay News 9 story in Tampa where they requested more of the Hogan and Nick Bollea, like, jailhouse conversations under a record request.
This was from 2008 when Nick was serving 8 months in prison in Florida over the reckless driving incident with John Graziano. And this, what came out at the time was a portion of the talk where...
Well, I think it was just a different conversation. I think... Yeah. I feel like if they had all this at the time, they probably would have published the other parts too. But my understanding was it was a different conversation. They had done a fresh request for more recordings. But it was already bad enough because, it was basically blaming John Graziano for the close to fatal, lifelong debilitating car wreck that he was a passenger in. So what's on these recordings that they found in 2016 is Hogan saying racist stuff when he knows he's being recorded. You know, most infamously,
he's calling Nick my N-word and stating, I'm calling you that because you're my best friend. But then
this is in 2008.
2008.
Yeah.
And then he's making a reference, and he's speaking in Carney too, which just adds to the bizarreness of this transcript that I'm not going to try and recite, but also makes a reference to if we're reincarnated together, hopefully it's not as black guys. Correct.
A couple of Blizak guys.
Yes.
He's only using Carney when he's talking about black people in this conversation.
Yes, that's another. Yes, like,
which would further add his acknowledgement. He knows he is being recorded to a degree here.
Yes, but Carney, just such an imperceptible code that nobody can figure out. You know, especially when it's like you're not using separate Carney terms. You are just doing the the Blizak his eyes type thing. Like, just, you know, yes, Hulk Hogan, we could actually crack your backwards Pig Latin code. I'm sorry, but. You know, that came out too, but I'm sorry. So where were we going with this originally? Right. What he said on the what he actually said, and how he reckoned with what he said. Okay, so the thrust of the comment is about, you know, Brooke dating a black guy who was actually the son of Cecil Barker.
Cecil Barker, who is of Sobe Entertainment, like a big mogul. He was an
aerospace billionaire who cashed out and then was basically just spending his money on whatever he found fun, and that included bankrolling a bunch of stuff for Hogan and Brooke. As it comes out through, you know, some of the other recordings and the transcripts that, you know, came out in the litigation and the FBI stuff and everything, Hogan basically was pretending to be Cecil Barker's friend to get him to pay for stuff. Barker thought they were best buddies, and it's really sad in that way. Like, you know, when there's unrelated litigation that involves them over Cecil Barker trying to fund a boxing career for Paul White, like, it comes up because some of the testimony is after, you know, maybe it wasn't testimony, maybe it was just a filing, but still, like, it's very clear in the stuff that came after that came out just how hurt he was by this. And, you know, he's also someone that tried to keep a low profile too. So, like, his name's coming up in the media a little bit with this. He's not happy with that. He's not happy to find out that the guy he thought was one of his best friends is not in these words, but if you really take the totality of everything he said, basically calling him and his son a bunch of dumb N-words. You know, it's awful. So there's that wrinkle to it too. But Brooke was dating Cecil's son, Unique, who was a rapper using the name Stax, I believe, with dollar signs instead of the S's, because sure.
Not to be confused with the NXT performer.
Not to be confused with Channing Stax Lorenzo. And God, I barely watch NXT, so I don't know how I know Channing Stax Lorenzo's full name.
One of those NXT name generators he was certainly a winner of.
It does have a certain je ne sais quoi to it, though. So it was all about that. And then, like, it is, like, again, like you said, even if he doesn't use the N-word, it's still very racist and hateful, everything he's saying. You know, you take the N-word out, it's still bad. But also, he's saying, I am racist. He literally uses those words. He says, I am racist to a point. And then I kind of want your guys' feelings on this, because when people hear the audio, I always kind of ask for their opinion on this. So there's a line that in the transcript always seemed weird, because after he says, I am racist to a point, yeah, as you show in the transcript on the video here, he just blurts out fucking N-words. And it just, in the transcript, it never really made sense. In the audio, the way his tone of voice shifts, I always felt like I thought it sounded like he was making air quotes, basically. He's like, look, I am racist to a point, you know, and then, like, fucking N-words. But
that's a term that he uses outside of this particular conversation where he just happened to use it. Yeah,
that's what it sounded like to me, that he was saying that's an example of racist things that he thinks and says. That's how it sounded to me. It seems like you're agreeing with that.
I would say the main issue that people are discussing today, whether or not they feel that Hogan has learned or is genuine and sincere in his
properly
apologies.
apologized.
And I think that, because I went back and looked at all this stuff. You look at his ABC interview with Amy Robach about a month after all the quotes come out, and yes, he's apologizing,
but it has nothing to do with what he said on that tape.
But he's also putting a lot of focus on, on his own grief, on the consequences of his own actions, on the consequences of his words being published. There's a lot of shock and focus on his own dismay and suffering instead of on a recognition of why those words are harmful. In addition to that, the apology that he reportedly, and it's basically confirmed by people in the room, including Titus O'Neil and Kofi Kingston, that
the letter was signed by all three members of New Day. So I think really we can say 4 people confirmed it publicly. And
where there's focus on, including by Paul Levesque reportedly introducing Hogan in this meeting where he is being restored, to normalcy in WWE and put back into the Hall of Fame. And reportedly you have Paul Levesque introducing him to have this all hands meeting with talent and saying, Paul Levesque, the current chief content officer, you might have heard of him. There's a Netflix documentary about him out right now. That you have to be careful as a public figure in today's society in 2018, where you may be recorded at any time without your knowledge. You have to be careful. Be careful. Don't get caught. Essentially, is the theme. In addition to, it does sound like he was apologizing as well, whether or not he genuinely recognized the harmfulness of his words or not, or why racist language is such a problem. Aside, and then on top of that, you have Mark Henry discussing just after the Netflix premiere where he gets booed. I invited him to go to black colleges and law schools and talk about what happened, and he wasn't interested in doing that. You think if somebody was so hurt about the consequences of his racist words, really wanted to restore his image, why would you not go along with that? Right, and then on top of everything else, at this point, I am pretty convinced that he constructed the Good Morning America apology to try to exploit the confusion that some people had over what he was actually getting in trouble with. I've heard you say this, but he does talk about Brooke forgiving him, and Brooke saying that, he's saying that, I guess Brooke had posted this, forgiving social media message towards him. And he's talking about how, because he's talking about Brooke's dating life, and he's just so grateful and sort of putting Brooke up as this example of, look, even she can forgive me, which is different from, the DJ Wu comments where he's using the N-word in the context of rap lyrics or something like that. Yeah, quoting people who he said called him stuff like my N-word and stuff like that. What I'm saying is, in the ABC interview, he's in that context talking about Brooke. He's clearly referring to what is said on the tape. He does, but where I'm going with this is, you look up media that came out, right when the story broke, because it had leaked online the night before that something was going on and that it involved racist comments. There was a lot of jumping to conclusions that it was the DJ Who Kid interview. And you can find articles that never got edited from places like CBS News that say that he got fired over the DJ Who Kid interview. So the fact that he's giving as examples, these lies about, which all of a bunch of his childhood neighbors debunked, about, when I was growing up in Tampa, I'm sure in the 60s. I'm sure this is true. Local Tampa News went and interviewed people who purportedly were around that neighborhood at the same time, saying nobody in the 60s was who was white were calling each other the N-word as a right. No one's doing that, and so I always felt like he knew the DJ Who Kid thing was something that, and in practice, you would see people online who didn't read much about it and thought he was in trouble for the DJ Who Kid thing. So I think he absolutely had some of that baked in there. Because
he also
apologized. He doesn't give that example if he's just referring to the to the sex tape racist comments, but also, like, it didn't even make sense, period, because then, like, he's asked, do you have a racial bias? And he says, yes. Like, that has nothing to do with what he just said either. So I think he's kind of trying to play it both ways, where he was trying to make it seem like it was, if you know about the sex tape part, he's trying to give enough to make it seem like an apology for that. But I think he was trying to blur the lines with the people who were genuinely confused over what he had said.
He was also like, and I do remember this at the time. I haven't gone back to look at his Twitter from 2015, but one thing I do recall was, number one, it was when he was just retweeting defenses of himself online. One of which I remember, this was not Hogan that tweeted this, but he retweeted it, was someone comparing Barack Obama using the N-word a month earlier on Mark Maron's podcast.
Ugh.
And Hulk Hogan retweets this. I was like, whoever is advising this guy,
Obama, okay?
Well, he clearly needed to get away from Twitter.
Well, you're not even remembering the best/worst part, which was
the photos of fans that turned out to be.
Yes, there was the Bible. Well, first there was the Bible verse when the story came out, and then fans started tweeting photos at him with the idea they were photos of themselves and they were black people supporting him. Once they realized he was just retweeting stuff like that, and like most of these were people who were trolling him using.
These were like random athletes.
It was like black European footballers that Hogan wouldn't have heard of. Yeah.
When you look at the meeting he has with the WWE talent, this is 2018, so it's 3 years since he had been let go. He's being brought back. Do you think Hogan understood how important that meeting would be? Because I think for many people, that is a critical point, that there is this opportunity to at least rehabilitate his image. And I think like that story carries a lot of weight with people in terms of like his kind of reconciliation of this. And it just became, for everyone that wants to discuss about, that Hulk Hogan should not be remembered for this, or that you're tarnishing his image. Hulk Hogan did not seem someone over these last 10 years that like this was necessarily something he viewed as tarnishing of his image, and having like a talking point in all of these interviews when he was given openings from an Ariel Helwani or a Pat McAfee about, do you have any regrets? And his regret would be doing the leg drop. Like, this was somebody that just, he had mentally moved on from this. And I think that meeting, I think if it goes differently, I don't think it completely quells criticism, but I think it, like, instead it just, I think, fanned those flames for a lot of people to see that here was a guy who at his core saw himself as a victim here and not so much the cause of this like image destruction to some.
I think the fact that Titus and all three members of New Day were moved to speak about it publicly in such detail and with such clarity, I think that's the reason that it was kind of this watershed moment. That, it's one thing that Dave Meltzer reported it, especially the way that a lot of people treat Dave online now. It wasn't at that level, 7 years ago. But it's another when you have four of the most prominent black wrestlers in that locker room confirming all of that and expressing their frustration with it. I'm trying to remember, because, you showed the Titus, like, Twitter statement. When he went on the radio and kind of blasted Hogan more, was that 2018 or was that after the Good Morning America appearance in 2015?
That it was on Busted Open Radio, and I'm trying to remember what year that was because I was literally just writing about that yesterday. I feel it was. I'd have to look it up. What exact year?
But regardless, like, if you start looking up Titus O'Neil, Hulk Hogan, you find that also he had given this interview on Busted Open.
This looks like around the same time, yeah.
So it was 2018. Okay.
Yeah.
Where he just goes into even more detail and just tears into Hogan. He brings up the Good Morning America interview and just how full of it was. Like, he just tears it apart at every level. So, like,
Here's the quote from Busted Open. At the end of the day, the company made a decision, this being bringing him back. I support the decision. I actually support having one of the most iconic figures in WWE history in Hulk Hogan be in the WWE Hall of Fame. What I don't support is the apology that was given in regards to the words and the actions he exhibited years ago. To me, when you have true remorse for being sorry about doing something, it's pretty simple. You don't have to be prepped to say certain things, and you certainly don't want to make excuses.
Yeah. And, he also went into, specifics of, come on, I know the high school you went to and the people that you knew. Nobody was calling each other the N-word as a term of endearment. He goes into all of that. And I think that you had, and also that was Titus still talent, or was Titus officially a company ambassador yet at that point?
By 2018, I think he was pretty much ambassador by that point. And let's not forget that 2021, when they do WrestleMania in Tampa, Hogan is put out there, and Titus is almost like cover for the guy. They're on camera together.
Because they're both
and
from Tampa.
Co-hosts.
They're both from Tampa, and audible if you thought there was going to be a location, and this was also in the pandemic.
You can't boo Hogan because he's standing right next to Titus O'Neil, hometown football player, babyface.
And you're probably it's factual. You're not drawing the same traveling audience. This is a pretty significant, probably Florida-based audience at WrestleMania.
Maybe not. They still drew 25,000 people or whatever it was each night, 21,000. I'm trying to remember the numbers Brandon actually got. But
regardless, the boos were there, and Titus was there, and then after the Vince thing, Titus is also put out there on Raw, right after it, and this guy is almost...
Oh God, he gave such an awkward... I don't remember the details of it. I just remember how awkward and obvious it was.
This was in the summer of 2022, and it's when the Vince stuff was really heating up, and Titus comes out, and he just has to give this raw WWE speech that is so out of context if you're not aware, but everyone was. Titus was put in these terrible positions in various forms.
Well, and don't forget too, he had also been suspended a few years earlier for putting his hand on Stephanie's shoulder and theoretically for touching Stephanie while being a black man.
He grabbed Vince's arm during.
It was that he touched Vince. That's right.
During
still,
Daniel Bryan's retirement, towards the end of the broadcast, I think in a joking manner, he kind of grabs Vince's arm. He gets suspended for that.
Okay, yeah. So that was 2016.
Yeah. It's right before Mania. He gets suspended on top of that.
Right, and everyone at the time always assumed this was so innocuous. Thank you for correcting me on exactly what it was, because I was having trouble remembering. It was so innocuous. It's in an environment where we know Vince, and I don't even mean in a sexual way, has done so much worse roughhousing with talent. At the time, certainly it was that was read as a thing that was only happening probably because Titus was black. Because also, remember, originally he was going to be suspended for much longer than he was. Originally he was going to be 6 months, and I think it got cut to 60 days. So he's also got a weird path with the company at that time too, because that's still a very recent memory. And something else too, looping back to Hogan, that I think kind of was a factor was that the announcement was, Hogan's been reinstated into the Hall of Fame. His suspension has ended. Even the suspension that you never announced. People had been asking them for years, is he removed from the Hall of Fame? Or is he just removed from the website listing for the Hall of Fame? And they would never answer anyone who reached out. Then all of a sudden, 3 years later, we suspended him from the Hall of Fame. He was on double secret probation.
We could probably go much longer on Hogan, but we do want to keep Bix around for 2 other stories, and then we're going to wrap things up. The last thing on the Hogan front, Bix, is how, obviously WWE, they did their tributes over the last week on all 3 of the shows. They did 10 bell salutes for. It's very obvious that in this last period when he came back in 2018, he was still presented as one of our legends, but I would say he was kind of de-escalated a little bit in terms of that. In his passing, are you expecting he is going to kind of be restored as this company's quote unquote Babe Ruth? Are you expecting with Warrior, they did put in that Warrior award, and he certainly had his baggage attached to him. How do you feel WWE sort of positions Hulk Hogan now in its history afterward? Is this going to be something largely contained to this week, or do you see Hogan still having this kind of heavier presence in his death when it comes to the company's storytelling and promotion of him?
It's a good question because, before the N-word rant, was reported on, he had really been like heavily reintegrated into WWE to the point that they did that Hulk Hogan night at MSG with that whole ceremony where they raised like a Hulk Hogan jersey to the Hall of Heroes where all the retired Knicks and Rangers jerseys were at the top of the building. And then there was like widespread outrage that it turned out it was just for that one night and was not going to be a permanent part of MSG. Like, Hogan had a lot of support at that time. That was that right before or was it a year earlier?
I think it was 2014. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a lot of support coming in.
Like, he had come back in 2014 to be like their all-time legend in terms of how they would
yeah, and intertwined with the launch of the network and all that. And it seemed like to whatever degree he had gone out of favor with fans, like a lot of that had kind of was restored with the launch of the network and stuff like the MSG show and whatnot. Because like I said, like I remember like it was like palpable. People thought it was incredibly like disingenuous and unfair that MSG wouldn't take, would let them do a ceremony like that. If I remember right, with MSG management present in the ring and part of the ceremony, and that it wasn't something they were actually leaving up there with the Knicks and Rangers jerseys. So it's not like going into the Inquirer story, fans were already down on them. Like, things had really been trending up for a while. So, I mean, it's hard to say. We look at past presidents, like, publicly, Andre the Giant certainly did not have the kind of baggage Hogan did. And, at a time where so many of their key legends were in WCW, in the late 90s, they kind of experimented with, like, the ghost of Andre the Giant being the signature legend of the company, with the original Legends action figures and stuff like that were all kind of built around Andre. And
I would suggest, remember the Real American Beer brand, WWE put in their press release when they announced that sponsorship.
They have a stake in this.
They have a minority stake in this brand, and there's all sorts of attention on Hogan right now. So I would not be surprised at all to see it, maybe now that he's died and people have had, a lot of positive feelings about Hogan, to, have that brand be more prominent again on their shows.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's going to be tricky because, the last appearance he ever made at a wrestling show was him getting booed out of the building. And, on a WWE show, 6 months before his death. So I think they're going to, if they do anything like that, I think they're going to ease into it. I don't think they're going to do it right away to really try to give him, I guess, the warrior treatment would be the way to put it. I mean, even that's not necessarily the right way to put it, because, like, Warrior had just been there. I guess, no, it is comparable, because Warrior was in the mix. He had just done the Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like we didn't really have a good feel for how they were going to handle Warrior until about a year later. So, we'll see. It wouldn't shock me if they really doubled down on, trying to create more of, like, the mythic figure of Hulk Hogan and, separate that more from Terry Bollea. Because, I mean, it seemed like with Ultimate Warrior, that's kind of what they were trying to do. That we are honoring the Ultimate Warrior character. We are not honoring the person behind that. They had some very weird moments with that, even if you were doing that, like with the stuff where, because at least once it was part of a WWE thing, I forget if the second time was, but like, the stuff where Dana Warrior would dress up as Warrior, but like in Pride themed gear, that got all the backlash. Because like of all the
and I would suggest like the average wrestling fan's knowledge of the terrible things that Warrior has said is relatively minimal.
Well, it was so on the DL.
Major mainstream story. More in America.
Yeah, most of it was on his like old blogs and stuff.
And then the coverage that got was on the internet and only that.
Yeah, exactly.
Frankly, the stuff that's going to be covered when some of these figures pass, it's going to be limited to like modern like media. Like I don't like to talk about people passing, but it's an inevitability. And a name like Ric Flair that pops up. I don't think if you have that Dark Side of the Ring episode with a Heidi Doyle, I don't think that's a story that would necessarily translate to a lot of modern fans unless it was, done in such a recent window, because it's like it's ancient history for some people that, number one, I think a lot of fans, they're not looking for these types of things to tarnish their nostalgic memories unless it's just confronting them straight in the face, such as the Hogan one did, obviously, with Vince McMahon. But that's like, we're going to have many of these examples that go far beyond pro wrestling of how these figures are looked upon when they pass, because there's so much at your disposal in this digital age and so much is out there, and you're continuously going to have this like line in the sand between how people are going to look back at people's legacies. And certainly there will be figures in wrestling, but I don't think of any beyond Vince McMahon that will command this level of sort of, just such a chasm between, how people look at Hulk Hogan. And it's like, it's all of it. You have to take into account all of it.
Yeah, and the Flair thing is a great example too, because the reason that was an episode was that it was like one of the most requested topics they do. But most of the fans requesting it only knew the absolute surface version of the story. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean... And
that's a very small percentage that knew that much, I would argue. Like, we're talking 2002 with a lawsuit that wrapped up in 2004. Like, that's just... It's just a totally different generation of people that are, not looking at, specific details that far back.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big reasons that episode was so controversial was that, like, the fans that had requested it just were not expecting what they got. Mm-hmm. And that brought it back out into the open. Like, if you looked around, like, it was mentioned in the, the famous, Flair article at Grantland, which I think because of that article probably means that a bunch of stuff like that probably will come up when Flair dies, because it was in this like prestige sports publication, all kind of collected, neatly into one place. But in general, like, yeah, I mean, it's wrestling. So much of this stuff is more obscure. I mean, God, look at how barely anything about the Ring Boy scandal existed online until a few years ago. And this is not me patting myself on the back. It's just true.
Yeah, I think for many, and this is a good pivot point because we do want to cover the update that came out this week. But that's that's a story again that I think a large amount of wrestling fans, I don't think they're seeking out the information that they want their entertainment to be overshadowed by these really dark stories that are going to confront their relationship to this. And a lot of that stuff, if you're not seeking it out, it can very much get fallen by the wayside. Brandon, why don't you bring us up to date on the what was filed this week and what the defendants are attempting to do here and how the plaintiffs have responded?
So we had an expected response from the plaintiffs, from the 8 Ring Boys who are filing a lawsuit against Vince McMahon, Linda McMahon, WWE, and even the parent company, TKO. So again, this was expected. The defendants, which we reported on prior, have all filed motions to dismiss this lawsuit on the grounds that this lawsuit filed in Maryland doesn't belong in Maryland, they say, because we don't live in Maryland. There aren't sufficient ties for us to fight this in Maryland. And Maryland is very important because Maryland is one of the only states which has removed all statutes of limitations when it comes to civil lawsuits for child sex abuse claims. So it's very important to these plaintiffs that this case stays in Maryland. And here the defendants are saying, look, we're all from Connecticut or we're elsewhere. We're incorporated in Delaware. This shouldn't be here. And the plaintiffs' attorneys are pointing out that, look, you did hundreds of events in Maryland in the relevant decades that this abuse is alleged to have occurred. They're even raising that, and I don't think this is something that's in the original complaint, but they're even raising that, look, you did nearly 100 episodes of Tuesday Night Titans in this studio in a suburb of Baltimore in Maryland. So they're establishing this case for this is you did all this business in Maryland at the relevant time period, and that's why they say this case should stay in Maryland, where there are no statutes of limitations for civil lawsuits for child sex abuse. And in addition to that, the defense have also pushed back on this issue that they have a duty of care to the plaintiffs at the time. They basically allege that whatever Mel Phillips was doing, he was not an employee even of us. You can think back to the 1992 interview where Vince McMahon refers to him as an occasional laborer, but he was probably an independent contractor. Whatever he was doing was of his own accord. The plaintiffs allege that they were recruited as ring boys to help with ring crew and other errands. But whatever Mel Phillips was doing, the defendants say, that was his own business. If he abused people at hotels, that wasn't at WWE events. So what are you suing us for is basically their defense. And the plaintiffs argue that, no, you had a duty, even if you did not directly hire us, even if we were hired by Mel Phillips, you still had a duty to assure that they weren't harmed. And the plaintiffs argue that that the defendants, Vince and Linda and the company, knew or should have known that Mel Phillips was a danger to children.
And we have 8 plaintiffs, correct?
We have 8 now, yes.
I guess, Bix, how would you... It is interesting at this time when this entire, Epstein story is at such a fever pitch that there isn't, that this is not sort of a story that is kind of making its way into just, some of the coverage itself, that you do have an official here at Linda McMahon who is a defendant in this case, that you can, connect the dots on a lot of this. I mean, it's mentioned somewhat in passing, but I would say this is probably a story that is really confined to, if you're, just following, pro wrestling stories much rather than, day-to-day
as far as
political
Linda's
stories.
involvement being the Secretary of Education, it's got a little bit of mainstream coverage ahead of her Senate confirmation hearing. Senator Tammy Baldwin did mention it in passing, kind of, but she was not grilled.
You're being kind to Senator Tammy Baldwin, but yes. It is interesting because, she's the Secretary of Education. She's going hard on, the whole, anti-trans angle, too, from, a corrupting children point of view. So the fact that she's being sued for this, the fact that we have a credible, witness under oath, Phil Mushnick 30-plus years ago, saying that Vince told him that Vince and Linda brought Mel Phillips back after, firing him over something to do with, being told, knowing that he had a peculiar and unnatural attraction towards children. It should be a bigger deal. The initial filing got some coverage, some of the follow-up got some mainstream coverage, but there hasn't been that much. And you would think just even the existence of it would just get mentioned more. It's Linda too. So it's not like her being the former head of WWE. It's a thing that is talked about. So it's not like it, and at this point, it's not like it's something you need to dig deep for either. No. So I don't know. Do people not know about it? And then when they do know about it, why are they not bringing it up more? I don't know.
It's an issue if it gets to trial, and if Linda is still involved, it could get more coverage at that point.
Yes.
Just to add a couple more details, TKO, which is a separate entity. TKO encompasses, of course, WWE, but the defendants are arguing that TKO should not be a named defendant in this suit because they argue that the plaintiffs, I don't know if they're denying this, but they argue that the plaintiffs have not asserted how TKO itself should inherit the liabilities of WWE. They're not saying that WWE doesn't have the liabilities.
This is a 2023 startup. What do they have to do with stuff that happened in the 80s?
So technical corporate stuff there could result in TKO being dropped, but would not result in WWE being dropped. So that could happen. The defendants are due to reply. They'll have another chance to say, to fire back the plaintiffs to say why their arguments aren't good enough. That's due on August 27th. If there aren't more briefings scheduled after that, all the parties want a hearing in person in court for this, which would presumably, if it happens, would happen sometime after August 27th. So this isn't going away anytime soon. But if the motions to dismiss are denied, in part or in whole, then presumably we would move to discovery. Sometimes when discovery starts to happen, that's when lawsuits get settled. So we'll see.
Yeah. Just as court power. But I think it's important to note, too, like, the threshold for a lawsuit surviving a motion to dismiss is not very high. Like, in all likelihood, the motions to dismiss will be denied and the lawsuit will continue. Like, they would have to have a pretty thin case and a pretty thin jurisdictional argument to for the cases to be tossed. Like, look, none of us are lawyers, but I'd be shocked if any of this got thrown out. Like, maybe the TKO part, maybe, but even then, like, look, like, it's, again, maybe in the latest motion, like, the plaintiffs are more clear about why they should have successor liability. And I don't know how the successor liabilities laws work, so I'm not saying that. But, like, you go through the history of the companies, everything was always merged into everything else. There were no, asset purchases.
And to be clear, they're not saying that WWE is not Titan Sports. They're just saying TKO should not be a part of this. But that argument doesn't encompass dropping WWE.
But even then, though, like, it was a merger. So, like, I mean, I guess if you really want TKO to be removed, fine, because, like, it doesn't really matter in the end because they own WWE. But, like, you look through the actual history, Capital Wrestling Company. Capital Sports was the Puerto Rican promotion. Capital Wrestling Company gets merged into the Massachusetts version of Titan Sports.
I was thinking about this. Like, one of the challenges that plaintiffs might have here is that you do have, as we talk about all the time, you have the 1988 temporary firing of Mel Phillips. At that point, they do rehire him, but at that point, you have that conversation with Vince to both Phil Mushnick, to Dave Meltzer. Phil Mushnick is said under oath that it happened. Dave corroborates it. And so at that point, I mean,
imagine if there had been a recording of that.
Yeah. At that point, you've got a pretty strong case that he has knowledge of a peculiar unnatural interest, that he should have had knowledge that Mel was a danger. How many of those allegations of abuse, though, are taking place after that point? I know we have that one in 1992 in July, but it's not very many of them, right? You've got all these allegations before that point, and the defendants have argued that, well, there was no way we could foresee that this harm would occur if it occurred. So all that happening before 1988, you've got to show that they had knowledge of a danger. They had knowledge that, or should have had knowledge that they would be harmed by Mel Phillips or Pat Patterson or whomever. And I think that's where it could get more difficult to claim.
Yeah, but they're going to have discovery. And one thing I think we know about WWE from other lawsuits is they've kept meticulous records for decades upon decades. I think at one point all that stuff was kept on microfilm. I don't know if it's been digitized since. But, like, God, like, just, for contracts, look at how, when they had the concussion lawsuit, look at how far back they had every single person's talent contract, everything that came up, like, in, like, Discovery and the Ultimate Warrior lawsuit, older stuff that came up in the Bill Eadie lawsuit.
Bix, do private entity records eventually become public domain?
Do what records?
Do private entity records eventually become public domain after, like, 100 years or something like that?
How do you mean?
No, I'm just kidding. Go on.
Okay. Where was I going with that? Now you just completely drove me out of my train of thought. So yeah, they have. Oh no, I remember. Yeah, they have meticulous records going back forever, and we know they weren't always the best about keeping things out of corporate memos too. Like, there's what was thought to be the smoking gun memo with Zahorian and everything. So it wouldn't shock me if, like, do I think there's a memo that says, we're getting rid of Mel Phillips because he's a child molester? No. Do I think there's a very good chance there are memos, at least from 1988, about his firing that maybe dance around the topic? Yes. Do I think there could even be memos from, the early 80s when the alleged incident or incidents in Allentown happened? Possibly. And we should note with that, like,
What are the Allentown incidents you're talking about? You're talking about Snuka?
no, the stuff that Superstar Graham and Bruno Sammartino brought up in '92, that
Which is placed in what year?
Bruno was not working there at the time. Superstar claims he was. So if you believe Graham, which, yeah.
So before 88.
So no, this would have been probably like around 82.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, let's take for granted that Vincent knew upon 1988 that Mel was abusing children,
or at least had very good reason to believe that he was. Yes.
All those allegations beforehand, there's at least a not weak argument, a not completely losing argument that Vince just didn't know upon 88. Yes, and maybe all those allegations with the plaintiffs who are relevant to those post 88 allegations survive. But if Mel was alive, okay, you can sue him for the pre 1988 allegations. But what about the post ones? And there's not as many of those.
Yeah, maybe almost every allegation in the lawsuit is before 1988. But like there's enough out there that we know about that's just, I gotta think they will be able to, once they, whether it's document discovery, whether it's taking depositions, I think they will be able to find more going down that rabbit hole, because, you can go back to what, I think he's talked about it some on his podcast, which I don't think he's doing anymore, but John Arezzi wrote in his newsletter in 1992 about meeting Mel Phillips in the mid-'70s and how there were things that at the time were at least awkward and with hindsight were very obviously signs of all this. That he had some random like tween teenage boy with him who he was looking after. That he owned a professional reel-to-reel video camera setup at like, what was it, like Christmas 75?
Yeah. And these are all details that support the notion that Mel Phillips was up to no good versus the idea that the company Vince Linda know.
But my point being, he was doing it so openly, though, that, later on, we know there is a video of him molesting a kid in a WWF ring before a show. I kind of doubt that's the
plaintiffs
only
would argue this was all
happened.
happening out in the open. He was wrestling around with kids in the ring before 1988. You should have known at that point. And Vince was at some of these shows.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like, he was not shy about any of this. I mean, there's the story from Chris Lowe's, that he told Tom Cole's lawyer back in 92. His first interaction with Mel Phillips was it was such a weird story, even by the standards of this. Because he's a smart aleck, teenage fan. Honky Tonk Man walks by and he calls him Wayne Ferris. Mel stomps hard on his foot, then apologizes, and this is just outside the arena in front of other people. Starts apologizing, offers to make it better, tears Chris Lowe's shoe off, and starts massaging it while muttering over and over, you shouldn't have said that to Honky Tonk Man. You should have showed him more respect. Like, there's so much stuff that we know that was happening in front of other people that I gotta think that especially once you open it up to discovery, like, it really is not a stretch to think that that this was known. With the Allentown thing in 82, that he was allegedly caught molesting a boy in a car in the parking lot at a TV taping. Look, even if you don't believe Superstar Graham, while Bruno was not there at the time, he said under oath in the Phil Mushnick lawsuit, this was something that everyone in wrestling, especially in that Northeast scene, was talking about at the time. Like, it was a widespread known story. So let's say, for argument's sake, it didn't happen. It was still such a widespread rumor that you would think it would have gotten back to the company to some degree. And look, I don't know how WWE did things back then. It's certainly not a secret in the modern era that they have a whole network of people they use to check up on people they're looking into hiring and stuff like that. Probably didn't have that back then, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, it also paints this picture, like whether you believe superstar Billy Graham or not, if you can convey that this was a known incident among the locker room, and that it just conveys this environment of like, we don't snitch, we don't take this up the totem pole, like stuff that happens, we keep contained, of this belief that we're not going to quote unquote hurt the business. And I think that goes to kind of show you like a underbelly of this whole thing, is that if an incident were to happen, even in just plain sight of everybody, nobody is contacting, as Vince McMahon would refer, the authorities about what was happening outside of the industry. Like it does paint this like this code that all of these guys were going by at the time, that even if they saw damning evidence right in front of them, it's just turn your head and just proceed as normal.
Yeah, and the one story we have about wrestlers kind of getting fed up, which is what Vince's limo driver, Jim Stewart, told, Phil Mushnick's lawyers, among other people, in '88, is that they went to Jim Stewart thinking he could reason with Vince, which is actually what ended up happening, according to him. That's why Mel got fired. And also, according to him, apparently Pat Patterson was the one that lobbied to bring him back. So,
and ultimately got, reportedly like a major six-figure sum when he did have to resign in 1992. Like that brings up the question of like a day laborer, like what necessitated such a payment in '92 when he finally leaves.
And if I'm remembering right, it's Jerry Millette that has given that number publicly, right?
Yes.
And Jerry Millette, claims there was no abuse. I'm not saying he's lying. We have to believe him. But my point being, Jerry Millette is someone who defends Mel Phillips.
Yeah.
Jerry Millette is not putting out that number with the idea that it's damning that Mel got so much money.
Yeah.
He's just, he's putting it out, not realizing that it looks bad. So you got to weigh it that way too. That okay, he doesn't even know that looks bad. So it does seem credible. And so far, I don't think in filings anyone has disputed when that number's come up in the lawsuit, right?
No.
So, and it makes sense though, because to the best of our knowledge, I don't think he even had a job until several years after he left, right? You hear the stories of him working at a Best Buy store in New Hampshire, but that's not till many years later.
He worked in indie wrestling for a while. He ran some indie shows with it.
Which
whether or not indie wrestling as a job is still a hotly debated issue.
Well, I know he promoted at least 2 shows, including at least one at a middle school. Yes, which I did. I didn't know until I found this newspaper clipping years ago, and it said he's the promoter. Mel Phillips is the promoter. There was one set of results for a different show in the Observer, but I don't think Dave knew that Mel Phillips was the promoter. Otherwise, I think he would have said something. I don't know how long it lasted, but yeah, he tried to stick around wrestling a little bit. Obviously, had enough money to try to run indie shows. So yeah, it certainly seems it always seemed like he had gotten a fair amount of money on the way out, whether it's, quote unquote, knowing where the bodies are buried or what. And total weird side note about all this, the ring that Jerry Millette ended up owning, that I think maybe he bought with Mel, I'm not sure, that I believe was used on those shows, that was the ring that was brought to the WWE warehouse to use as the blueprint for the modern WWE rings. If you've ever heard the story Cornette tells of finding a southern ring in the Northeast that they would then base the construction of the modern rings on in '98, that was Jerry Millette's ring. I know, everything's
now we know.
Wrestling, yes. So go ahead.
Let's just get through one more story here before we wrap things up. And of course, we'll bring it home here with Vince McMahon. As we go back to last Thursday, of course, Vince McMahon had come out of his silence to post a message about Hulk Hogan. But earlier in the day, the man was very busy. This comes TMZ Sports, the first to report this. Neil Flanagan and Brandon have a story up on the Post Wrestling site. A woman whose vehicle was involved in a collision with a car driven by former WWE chairman Vince McMahon had said that she is, quote, lucky to have survived. Vince McMahon is scheduled to appear in a Connecticut court next month after being cited for reckless driving. Barbara Duran, age 72, founder and CEO of BD8 Capital Partners, gave her account of the incident on Facebook. She claimed that McMahon had struck her around 80 to 90 miles per hour in his Bentley Continental GT after speeding in and out of cars. Duran wrote that she's lucky to have survived. She was on the way up to catch a ferry to Martha's Vineyard last Thursday morning. Both cars were totaled. Vince McMahon, who she does tag here, hit me going 80 to 90 miles per hour.
Vince is on Facebook.
Well, she attempts to tag it.
Oh, okay. As I drove in the right lane of a narrow Merritt highway, myself, my dog are mostly fine, but was lucky to have kept control of the car. An unmarked state trooper had been following him as he sped in and out of cars down the highway and had just turned his lights on to pull McMahon over, but he was not in time. Both front wheels of McMahon's Bentley were sheared off and his airbags deployed, probably saving him from significant injury. The trooper told me afterwards that McMahon saw me last minute and swerved, smashing into my left rear, but that if he had hit me full on, there might have been a very different ending for me.
And for people watching video, this image, which is not in the TMZ article, is an image that Barbara Duran took apparently of Vince's Bentley, which the right wheel is just, I think it's in there. It looks like somebody's taking a giant bite out of his car.
And this is happening like pretty much as the Hogan news is first breaking. So
no. It was a little after 9, right? So it's less than an hour before Hogan's heart stops. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, before the news had just broke. So, yes, McMahon will be in court next month.
Well, that's not all. There's a third car involved in this.
Who is the third individual here?
So it's a car in the opposite lane. So they're on the highway, and Vince McMahon and Barbara Duran are on one side of the highway with their collision. Vince crashes into the median. We obtained the incident report for this. And in the oncoming lane of the highway, the opposite lane of the highway, in the left lane, as Vince smashes into the median, apparently debris flies over the median onto another car in the opposite side of the highway. So that car is impacted hard enough for that car's airbags to deploy. Vince's airbags have deployed, and that car is damaged too. It turns out, and we're not going to say the person's name, he's not a public figure, but the name and birth date align with information we could find about a WWE employee. Current W employee, and the timing works out for this employee to be on his way to work that morning.
Yeah, it's probably just a coincidence, just a very weird one.
Yeah, it's just a poetic. W staff still cannot escape the actions of Vince McMahon.
Can you imagine this guy getting to headquarters like like an hour late and being asked, "Why weren't you on time?" Funny thing.
I bet he was late at work that day. Yes,
might have been.
Can you imagine if both Vince and Hogan had died within an hour of each other?
Oh, Jesus, Bex, you had to take us there.
I don't even know what that would look like.
Vince has been charged with reckless driving, which is a misdemeanor. It's not a typical arrest, but he's out on $500 bond. So again, as John mentioned, he's due to appear in court on August 26th.
Is that not? It's either, I think that's like the day, or it's like a day or two after his next birthday, I believe. So he can celebrate.
I think his birthday is 24th. Yeah.
Okay. Well, happy birthday, Vince.
Yes.
What a show, folks! This we have set the record, the longest uninterrupted Pollock and Thurston in history here, with the one and only David Bixenspan.
I love that you thought this would be 45 minutes. I mean, even if I had jumped out at the end of the Hogan talk.
Bix, when have I ever invited you on and undershot the amount of time? I think I have always under.
Why do you think I made sure that we pre-recorded this in the morning?
We're not live. It's what's going on here.
We do
had
have
Wow,
a
between the
minor
tweets is
update.
recorded out of order? Oh.
We do have a minor update if you want to send Bix on another tangent here. In the Dispenza versus Moxley and AEW case, which is a lawsuit where a former production member with AEW was shoved on a Dynamite taping by John Moxley. He says that he suffered injuries to his neck because of this. This is a lawsuit that's been going on for about a month and a half. AEW is trying to get this lawsuit moved from Michigan State Court to federal court. As part of that, you got to show that you got something called diversity of jurisdiction, that the parties in this lawsuit are all from different states. So you got to say, okay, yeah, Moxley's from Ohio, Dispenza's from Florida. You got to say what state AEW is from. Well, what state is a business from? Well, it's from the citizenship of the underlying entity. Well, what's the underlying entity of AEW? Well, of course, it's something called Beatnik Investments, which is an LLC that's been controlled by the Khan family. It's been used by Shad Khan in the past to get involved in a business with the Black News Channel. But it is, according to Florida Public Records, business records that you can find, it is a company that is controlled by Tony Khan and his sister Shanna Khan. And last week we discussed this, that to show that we have diversity of jurisdiction here, AEW has said that they filed these details under seal and have said that, yeah, but they're from Illinois, I think is what they're saying. And the judge said that, no, you can't file this under seal. AEW raised that they have concerns, their justification for keeping this under seal is that if they put this information on the public record, that they're going to be susceptible to AI fraud somehow. The judge came back the other day, I believe yesterday, and said, no, we're rejecting these arguments. These are not strong enough arguments. You've got 7 days. You can either refile what you tried to file under seal, or I'm going to send this back to state court. So will we find? And of course, I have tweeted about this, and this is leading to many questions about what are they hiding? Well, I think they're just hiding that. I don't know. It seems silly to me that this information is being concealed. I don't think we're going to find anything very newsworthy underneath it, but we'll see.
I mean, my assumption is that it's probably just because it's something we know they've been secretive about already. It probably has to do with the assumption we're under that Warner has some kind of minority.
It definitely does not have to do with that. Trust me, Bex, this does not have to do with that.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh,
no. Because
are you being sarcastic?
The question. No, I'm not being sarcastic.
Okay.
The question is who owns Beatnik. The question is not who owns AEW. Who is the controlling owner of AEW, and there's no secrecy about that. It is Beatnik Investments LLC. So the question is, who owns Beatnik Investments LLC? WBD, I'm almost certainly does not own a piece of Beatnik. I believe they very likely own a piece of AEW, a less than 10% piece, because otherwise that would have to be disclosed under certain rules. So that's not what's going to be disclosed here. What's going to be disclosed here is who controls Beatnik.
I'm trying to remember which record is it, because I'm looking at some of the Florida business records to refresh my memory. Which is it that has the trusts owning Beatnik? Is it the Florida business records, or is it something else? Because I know I've seen them.
You can find records in Florida about Beatnik, and you can find Tony and Shanna Khan's names there.
But there was, I know I've seen records that specifically said it was the trusts that that owned either Beatnik or AEW or something.
I don't know.
Okay.
And they have been clear that there are trusts. They call them Trust A and Trust B in this document. Hopefully they'll file them publicly, and we'll find out what exactly is behind these sealed documents.
So if it has nothing to do with that, yeah, I don't get what would be the reason to be so secretive about this.
Could just be
it was the same
private
question
companies
I
trying
had.
to keep their information private, but maybe not being aware enough that there's a whole cottage industry around AEW paranoia.
Which thankfully you guys try not to engage in.
We try.
Even if it's not the best for YouTube numbers.
David, tell us about how are you going to be kicking off the second decade of Between the Sheets this weekend? I do encourage everyone to go listen back. If you enjoyed this conversation, David and Bix spent about 90 minutes going
David
through...
and Bix?
Oh, sorry. Listen, we're 2 hours deep here. David and Chris went through about 90 minutes worth of the week that was in July of 2015 on their 10-year anniversary show last weekend. And, of course, they are back this weekend to tackle another decade.
Well, 90 minutes of Hogan, much more than 90 minutes of everything else. But yes, this coming week, we're going to have 2006, where my brain is mush. Let me open up the notes to actually remind me what we talked about. Oh, Jeff Hardy re-signing with WWE and the infamous article on WWE.com that talked about his crystal meth problem and then deleted it an hour later. That is, that's one of the top stories of the week. Trying to remember what else there was here. Just a lot of, general 2000s WWE weirdness. Oh, James Beard's referee tryout, where he ends up just spilling all the details of it on the Wrestling Classics message board. That's one of the things we talk about. We're in the middle of the final Diva search at the time, and it's because, of course, it's a mid-2000s WWE show, so of course there's something that's kind of creepy, and in this case it's the week where all of the Diva Search contestants get hit in the face with pies while cutting promos. So there's that. Plenty of stuff going on in Japan, CTU's second anniversary show. In a story I'm sure you will never hear about on any other episodes Between the Sheets, much less many times in the Observer archive, Antonio Pena is claiming that AAA is going to be running shows in the U.S. soon.
Oh, 2006, that was going to be their breakthrough year.
Yes, and also this is like 2 months before he dies, so there's also that. Vampiro announcing the formation of RXLL, his promotion that ran like 2 shows that he said was going to be the Mexican affiliate of Wrestling Society X. Various TNA stuff, TNA's website posting updates on why certain wrestlers drink coffee and some of their favorite foods, and much more. So that's this coming week's 2006 episode Between the Sheets. We're going to take a week off after that from the main show for Chris's birthday and other things, and then be back 2 weeks after that. We don't have the year of that one picked yet. And then on the patreon.com/Between the Sheets, we just finished doing, instead of our usual deep dive. By the way, I have no clue what that background image is on the Patreon page. I really need to change that.
It looks like you opened up paint and then you put on like the 4-point paintbrush and just scribbled.
I genuinely have no idea what it is or how it got there, and I don't know why I haven't fixed it at any point. I'm glad we're
analyzing it
in the last 9 years. But so on there, instead of doing our usual monthly deep dive, we did 4 smaller topics, including the RF video split from ECW in 1995, interview Too Cold Scorpio gave about his departure from WCW, a look at the column/interviews that Mike Lano probably made up in the first issue of his newsletter, John Arezzi interviewing Dave Meltzer in 1992, and also this week we're going to have a mailbag show on the Patreon, and then next month, going to be a deep dive, but we're changing it to where now we'll have the big single episode version at the end of the month, but we will drop the segments each week as we record them. So August is going to be Bill Watts' brief spell as a booker, and then for 3 weeks, the head booker of the World Wrestling Federation. So we're going to take a look at that, all the newsletter coverage, how Watts covered it in his book, and more. And then I'm trying to remember what else have we done recently on the Patreon. John probably remembers this better than me for some reason.
I don't know. I just have one question, though, is that, bro, don't you ever get tired of talking about wrestling?
You mean, bro, don't you mean fake wrestling?
I think Heyman is he's kind of taken a seat in favor of our lead writer of 1998-1999 WWF.
I heard that you only recently discovered that Vince Russo and Jonathan Coachman are doing a podcast together. This is relatively new information to you.
Yeah, that was a thing. Oh yeah, we did Conan's 1994 Torch Talk in June. We did 2 parts on the USA Network against WWF and Viacom lawsuit from 2000, which that's definitely something that people who listen to this show would enjoy. Yes. I think. Earlier this year we did the Genesis of WrestleMania. We did the 2020 expose. We did the career of Terry Taylor in January for the 100th Patreon show.
Oh dear.
And more. And of course, if you go to the Patreon page, patreon.com/Between the Sheets, and most of these are also in the regular podcast feed, we have a whole collection of free shows that you can check out to sample Patreon content, including the Fuck Sabu series about his 1995, the what else do we have in there? The Titan Gate shows, first part of ECW on TNN, all sorts of stuff like that. So patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets to check all that stuff out.
You can follow all of Brandon's work, both on Substack and patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. He's got several articles up at Post Wrestling this week looking at the Vince McMahon story that emerged on Tuesday, as well as a deep look into what exactly Hulk Hogan said on those famous tapes as well. But that is where you can follow the state of the business. Arm yourself with all the numbers so that you can engage in the most enlightening discussions with your friends at your next get-together. And for me, don't feel left out at all. I have written a bunch of stories this week on Hulk Hogan. The final part will drop later today, looking at the final years of when Terry.
I was wondering how many parts this is going to be.
It was supposed to be 3, but it's going to end at 6. So that's it.
Okay, I'm curious. How much is your final word count going to compare to Dave's?
I don't know what Dave's final one was. Mine was 16,000 words.
Okay, so you actually outdid Dave on this because Dave's ended up, I think, a little under 15.
Wow. He did his like in, I don't know how the man did that in like an afternoon because this took me an ungodly amount of time.
Oh, he did such a good job with it that I was genuinely shocked. Like, I assumed he must have started it within the last couple of weeks once he knew things had taken a turn for the worse. But no, as Dave always does in The Observer, he just churn this out somehow.
Incredible. All right, everybody. That is going to end the 2-hour edition of Pollock and Thurston. Sure? I don't think we have any more topics to get to. But Bix, thank you so much for carving out so much of your time to join us. It's always great when we get to talk to you. And we thought with this topic in particular, there was only one man to go to. And if you want more on the Gawker story, go onto Netflix, skip past WWE Unreal, and go watch Nobody Speak, featuring one David Bixenspan in a very
hot on Netflix too,
gym.
Okay?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yes. Please go watch me sweating my ass off in Johnny Rogers' non-air conditioned office on the hottest day of the summer of 2016. Yes, please go watch that while I'm just completely sweating and the audio is terrible because they couldn't get good levels and all that. Yes, please put that on.
Do you have any other upcoming documentaries that you're going to be appearing in?
That I'm going to be appearing in?
Or involved in? TBA?
That I'm appearing in? No.
Okay. Well, if anything happens, we'll definitely have the invite out for Bixenspan to come back at a later date. Thank you to everybody for joining us here on Pollock and Thurston. We're back every single Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Check out Between the Sheets with David Bixenspan and Chris Zellner. For Brandon, I am John Pollock, and we'll chat with you next week.